Kings Broadcasting Network. This is the Made in America show right here on our national radio affiliates. I want to welcome all of you that's now tuning in. Don't forget, we are streaming live on the World Wide Web at HomeTalkUSA. And now I'd like to welcome the co-host of the show with me, my partner in crime, Mr. Greg Owens, the Made in America guy himself. Hey, Greg, how you doing, buddy?
The Made in America guy himself, I guess. Yes,
That's right.
Been promoting that and happy to do so for many, many years. Glad to be with you, Michael.
Well, I'll tell you what, if for our audience that's been with us for the last couple hours, as you know, Greg was our guest on the Home Talk USA radio program in hour one, and we started a conversation. We were talking about the election. We were talking about tariffs. We were a whole bunch of stuff, what we can expect, talk about assembling products in the United States. This kind of all ties in to what you want to talk about today with Mr. Kenneth, what is it, Rapoza?
Ken Rapoza.
Rapoza.
Yeah, that's one that doesn't flow off the tongue very easily.
I'll tell you, to Cajun, we don't pronounce things right, but he's with Prosperous America. Tell us a little bit about their organization, though, Greg.
Well, it's a coalition for a prosperous America, and it's a lobbying group. And when people think of lobbying groups, they tend to think of, these big multinational corporations that are going in there and basically intimidating and bribing people. CPA is not that. They're advocates for American manufacturing, farming, and ranching, and they're all about policy, not politics. It's a completely bipartisan organization, and that's what our show really tries to focus on. I mean, we've listened to an awful lot of rhetoric coming from all sides during an election cycle, and it's sort of hard to separate, what is hyperbole from what is actually going to happen and be put into policy. Yeah. And that's what we try and do during this hour is identify what's really going to happen and how it can impact our listeners, who a lot of you are American manufacturers and are anxious to see how it all plays out.
Well, I love this. It all boils down to fact checking, but the problem with fact checking is who's doing the fact checking. That's the problem. You can't even trust the fact checkers anymore because everybody puts in their own political, spin on it. And you can spin it any kind of way you want,
Sure.
But at the end of the day, how do you cover for inflation? How do you cover for unemployment? How do you cover for the national debt? How do you cover for the immigrants coming in the United States? I mean, you can't cover this. They can spin it all they want. And all this is a factor to our quality of life, Greg, and how we're going to live as Americans,
Absolutely. And some of the biggest spend is when you see somebody cite a statistic, and some of my favorite ones in economics, and of course, industrial policy and trade policy has a lot to do with economics. You can come up with a statistic to basically prove anything you want to. And during the pandemic, comparing what was going on in the pandemic and inflation, deflation, this, that, and the other thing, very, very difficult in a turbulent, disruptive period like that to find any trends. But unfortunately, they're used quite a bit to try and spin different ideas, and we just have to filter through it, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's always supposed to be that we're Americans first.
Yes.
And we should be looking at issues that have to do with America first, regardless if you're a Democrat, an independent, a libertarian, a Republican. But that's not the case. It's parties, unfortunately, live and die with their platform. And
it's really amazing when you get involved in a group like CPA, when sort of that partisan spin is taken out of the conversation. You can sit down with Republicans, Democrats, have an adult conversation about something, talk about facts, and come to a common solution.
But why is it when you're talking to them without a microphone, like Trump saying, I'm going to be the president of common sense? Well, I've talked to a lot of them off mic, off record, and they have common sense. Unfortunately, when you put the mic on, what did you just tell me? Now, they can't because they are buying by the cost of running, the cost of the people that's have to put up the money to get them elected, and they are strangled by their their platform. That's the best way I can say it.
Yeah, there is an awful lot of that, and that's really when I say we don't like to talk politics here. Politics is all about getting votes and getting elected, right? That's what if they're not elected, they can't do anything, and they get money from different groups that are supporting them, so they have to support them. So that really is a bit convoluted when you think about it. And it blocks a lot of common sense policies from being enacted, and that's what we're trying to sort through is providing a voice for common sense and practical solutions to our issues.
Yeah, the guys like Kenneth with Prosperous America fit right into that bill.
Absolutely.
Hey, and that's what I like about it, to try to, hey, look, everybody knows I'm a conservative. Everybody knows I'm a libertarian. Let's just take my politics out of this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I'm going to report on the facts and tell you, like we had the conversation in the first hour about, I could tell you how many jobs I had on the Trump, and I could tell you how many jobs I had on the Biden. Well, that's proof in the pudding. You cannot spin that. And at the end of the day, I tell people, unfortunately, Democrats are anti-business. You could say it away. It's not picking a political side. They're just anti-business. That's just the way they operate. Republicans are more pro-business. Now, I can tell you when you have the moderate Democrats, they could be in the middle of pro-business issues, and they vote on pro-business issues. But if you're going to do staunch left, you're in trouble. They don't care. All they looking for is for power. That's just fact. They're looking for, control, keeping you poor, keeping you uneducated, and keeping you government dependent. I hate to say it, but that's fact. That's not picking on them. That's what they stand for. So if that's what you stand for, and America voted for that, it didn't work. So now people came back to common sense to say, we want a guy that's going to be in there that has demonstrated to put America first. And let's see how he's going to do this this last term. He might be totally opposite. I don't know. But now he's getting on a good track. He's got a good start. So it looks like he's going to pick up his first-time policies. Greg?
Yeah, I just saw a poll the other day where his approval ratings are 9 points higher than were the first term in. Nobody really knew what to expect. But I think he does have a mandate, and I think a lot of the common sense things that he's talking about have broad support among Americans. And I think as the Democratic Party sort of reinvents themselves after what's gone on in the last 8 years, that a lot of them may join him in some of those common sense.
That's the point that I'm saying. The middle end is going to join him, and they proved it. And they proved it. In some things, the middle end, because hey, let's face it. These House members that live in Democratic areas, but they voted for Donald Trump. I tend to believe they need to listen to their voters because they're still trying to figure out how they voted for him. They just don't get it.
They really do need to start listening, and I think they will, because the coalition of oddballs is sort of broken up, and as they reinvent themselves, they're going to have to protect some of the Democratic Party is going to have to protect some of the elected officials that are in red states and red districts to help get them reelected.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap it up. Hey, I got the single. You're listening to Made America right here on the King's Broadcasting Network. We're going to be back with our guests from the Prosperous America. Mr. Kenneth will be our guest. Just stay tuned.
From Philly to Fresno, Brooklyn to Boston, Data Cable Superstars has the best prices on installation of Cat 5 and Cat 6 wiring for cameras, computers, phone, and data, specializing in off-peak installs as to not interrupt your workflow. If this is an I need it done yesterday situation, then it's time to call Data Cable Superstars at 203-942-1427 or go to datacablesuperstars.com. That's Data Cable Superstars, all one word, .com. Data Cable Superstars, where estimates and big ideas are always free.
Hey, welcome back to the Made America Show right here on the Kings Broadcasting Network. Don't forget, we are streaming live on the World Wide Web at HomeTalkUSA.com. Always visit our website if you want to look for upcoming guests and topics, who's our sponsors, our radio show, my TV show. It's all sitting there at HomeTalkUSA.com. But don't forget our sponsors. This segment of the show is sponsored by Green Products. Protect your wood from future damage with Copper Green Wood Preservative. greenproductsco.net. All right, Greg, man, I'm waiting to speak with our next guest. Who is he? Mr. Kenneth?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Our next guest is Ken Rapoza from the Coalition for Prosperous America. He's the industry analyst for the organization, and we're going to talk a little bit about exactly what that means. But Ken, welcome to the program. I thought we'd start out by you sharing a little bit about your background with the audience. We share a couple things in common. We both have some experience in Brazil. And then, how did your career start out? How did you get interested in Made in America? And what the heck is an industry analyst at CPA?
All right. Well, yeah. So Greg and I have met before. But Greg, what do you mean nobody? I need an introduction. Nobody knows me. I mean, I'm super famous.
I would think so.
Okay, so, I'm a longtime journalist. I worked for some of the best in the business. I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal in Brazil for many years. I left there in 2011, and I became the BRICS reporter for Forbes, which means I covered Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and emerging markets less so, but mostly those four giants I covered for Forbes from a business and investor lens for the most part, sometimes political risk as well, with China being a big political risk story, obviously.
Sure.
And then, I was at Forbes from like 2011 to March 2020. So, I mean, if you remember that time in American history, that was the beginning of COVID. So I was writing about COVID before COVID even had a name. Wow. It was called SARS-2 at the time. It wasn't even called COVID-19 yet. So, and then in March 2020, Forbes let me go off my contract and put me on, clickbait pay. I reached out, and then I think I just reached out to Dan D'Amico, who would follow me on Forbes, my China reporting, and probably a year or two before that, and Dan D'Amico was probably he's like the grandfather of Coalition for Prosperous America, and sure. I had never heard about the organization at the time. And he said, "You can come work for us, Dan, come work for us." And I said, "Sure." I've always wanted to be a senior fellow somewhere, That's what I thought of myself at the time. I wanted to retire as a senior fellow at a think tank or something, and I never thought about it again. And then when I lost my contract at Forbes, maybe a month when it was middle of COVID, and who knows what was going to happen in the world at that time. Remember, at that time, you were looking at numbers out of Italy where 14% of the people who were going into the hospital with COVID were dying. So you were like, right. I could be dead in 2 months for all I know, but in the meantime, I need to work. I reached out to Dan D'Amico on Twitter, and he put me in touch with the heads of Coalition for Prosperous America. I did my interview, and lo and behold, here I am. So I was basically hired to, give a deeper lens of what the coalition is up to. So my job is basically to understand, almost like business intel, and also as a writer as well. So I write a lot for the website for our members, so they know what we're up to, what's going on on Capitol Hill as it relates to our members, which of course are mostly people who have manufacturing companies like you have, Greg, or people who are in the production industries. They could be agriculture as well. They could be ranchers and so on. And these are people who are being outcompeted, for lack of a better word, from importers, right? So they want to remain in business. So our job, of course, is to help them remain in business. And what I follow what's happening on Capitol Hill. So I attend all the hearings, and I let our lobbyists know, for example, hey, this guy said this. Maybe you should talk to him. So that's my day to day, knowing what's going on in the international trade arena.
Right. So it's interesting. Both of us lived in Brazil for a while. I lived in Mexico. I don't know if you actually lived down there, but you covered it, I know.
Yeah.
International business background. And here we are on this program called the Made in America Hour, supporting American manufacturing. When did it occur to you that was your calling in life?
Well, I think for me, okay. Oh, God, that's such a long story. My grandfather made suits for a company called Anderson Little in a small city called Fall River, Massachusetts, which at the turn of the century in the early 1900s was essentially the China of the New York fashion industry. And these are, he grew up he had a decent middle-class life. And, my father later on, he went and worked for the defense contractors, right? He worked for Raytheon. So that was, of course, the big business during the Cold War. And then he lost his job when the Cold War ended. Of course, that was Raytheon was in the manufacturing side. So he was working on inspecting parts for that were going into nuclear submarines. That was pretty much his gig.
Wow.
Now, he wasn't manufacturing them; he was inspecting them. So when the Cold War ended, of course, he lost his job at Raytheon, and he became a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman. My mom went to work full time. She was already working part time, but then she went to work full time at Joanne Fabrics and Crafts. And we were probably down, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000 a year as a family of four. I dropped out of college because my father wasn't paying the plus loan anymore, right? The parent loan was no longer affordable. And that point on, I just felt a sense of injustice there, Went to college and wanted to understand how the world worked, I became a journalist. I wanted to study it and write about it and let people know, how the world works. Hey, here, people, here's what I've discovered. Maybe I'm wrong, but here's what I've discovered. And let's talk about it. So that's how I really became interested in it was, my growing up, my father losing his job and really seeing, wow, when you lose a manufacturing job, man, it's devastating. It was devastating for my family.
That is a story that you hear about from so many people. We've had Jim Stuber on the program from CPA as well. He talks about his experience with his parents in the steel mills. The experience that I've seen in Oneida, New York, with the biggest flatware factory in the world, 2,300 employees shutting down, and all the people that were displaced. And it sounds like yours is a story of displacement. And that is one of the reasons that I'm in it, is to try and be the voice for people who have lost their jobs in manufacturing and like to jump back into the game, and also younger people who maybe have never considered manufacturing as a career that really need to take it into consideration because it's coming up. But we're coming up on a break here. I am Greg Owens this is Home Talk USA, the Made in America Hour. We will be back shortly with Ken and get into some substance and great material on issues related to Made in America. Welcome back, everybody, to Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. I'm Greg Owens, and this is the Made in America Hour. Before we get back to our conversation with Ken, I'd like to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, Lion Energy. You can go anywhere with portable power solar generators. Find them at lionenergy.com. Ken, welcome back. And as we transition into the third segment of our hour, thought we'd get a little bit in depth about your takeaways as the industry analyst for CPAs. What companies or what industries have you focused on? And, maybe what is some of the interesting stories that you've covered, written about, and worked on over the past couple years?
Well, Greg, before I start, let me segue with something about what I just talked about a little while ago. You talk about how manufacturing, it's a good thing. Years ago, people think about manufacturing as, being a dirty job, or, it's something that a high school pleb does, right?
Right.
Went to college instead. And I can tell you something. What people don't realize, you don't have to be in manufacturing. You could be a barista if you want to. You could be a lawyer. That's fine. But the cities and towns that you live in, like the example I gave you, Fall River, it's all these old mills, right? They're all these, gray stone mills everywhere by the dozens. They're all empty now, or they're like some kind of store or a gym or whatever. And that place, that small city of 50,000, there was no homeless. There was no extreme poverty, right? This was an up and coming place where people lived a good life, where you could raise a family without two incomes. And it was clean, and there were like theaters, and there were nice restaurants, and that's gone now. That's gone. I mean, it's slowly coming back, but you're talking about almost 20, 30 years later.
Yep.
And so, this is like, you don't have to be the guy who works at Quaker Fabric making curtains. You don't have to be that guy. But if you're living in that city, you better hope that a company like Quaker Fabric is around, because you're not going to survive on just immigration lawyers and like personal injury lawyers. That's not going to be enough to keep the city alive.
Well, what you just described, you could say exactly the same things about Oneida, New York, which was a factory town. And it wasn't just the people that were working on the assembly line, or, you think of factory work as just assembly work. It's not. It's the cost accountants. It's the in-house counsel. There's all sorts of jobs associated with that plant. Well, they all have to go eat lunch, right? So they go across the street and they grab a slice of pizza from the pizza place. Yeah. What do you think happened to the pizza place after they laid off 2,800 people?
Yeah.
And now who are they going to sell pizza to? Because a lot of them, they left town, and neighborhoods that used to be vibrant, beautiful, middle-class neighborhoods with manicured lawns are now sort of a ghetto. And it's just tragic. And that story repeats itself all across what a lot of people refer to as the Rust Belt, but it really extends down south towards Florida with all the textile manufacturing and all of these businesses that were just disrupted, and their communities were decimated by those jobs being shipped overseas, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the message from the United States, like an organization like Coalition for Prosperous America, I think and this is something that politicians, of course, have to do, and they're not always great at it. But the message is, look, over the last several years, certainly over the last generation, our market, our consumers, which buy like no one else, has made your countries richer than they ever were before, right? For sure, right?
Yep.
And business is booming in Mexico, and of course China. We've seen it grow like no other emerging market on earth has grown like China. And something, and many people who used to make the things that we're now importing from these places have really lost out. And the places that used to make it, they're ghost towns now. And maybe some of those people moved to Brooklyn or the Bronx, but whatever. Maybe they rather live in Rome, New York, because that's where they grew up. And they can't.
And some of those people were able to reinvent themselves. I know a lot of people who worked in administration and sales went on to find other career paths. But it's that 10, 20, 30% of the people that just never recovered from the disruption of losing their job and their community collapsing, that it really tugs at my heart. And I'd like to bring those jobs back. So maybe some of them that are still young enough to get jobs will have an opportunity, and hopefully some of the younger people will once again take a look at manufacturing, and we can build this country back. Because like you just said, the whole thing sort of it's the foundation with which a nation is built on, making things, right?
Yeah. And as I was saying, right, it's like it's not hard to convince countries. You tell Mexico, you tell China, hey, look, you can even say something basic. We want what you guys have now because we used to have it. We sold a lot of it, right? And we let our multinational source from you and build things there instead. Okay, whatever, fine. Yeah, it is what it is. But we want some of that back. We want that too. We want to have guys making things. We want to have people. We want to have communities growing up around manufacturing so they can grow. Like having. We're not all going to make money working for DoorDash. Not going to. So and I think these countries will understand. They'll say, "Oh, damn, that sucks for us now," but they'll understand it. They'll understand it because they want that too. They've wanted it and they've got it, and I think they'll understand. So. I think that's what.
Well, I think they understand just fine. It's a question of putting balance back in it too. It's not like we're going to send China back to where they were 50 years ago when they hardly made anything, when it was agrarian subsistence society, people starving to death. Heavens no. But if we could put balance back into the world and take some of these countries that have had aggressive export overcapacity issues, where their entire economy depends on subsidizing their exports. And saturating the rest of the world with products, if we can find balance in that and bring some of it back, I think it benefits everybody in the long run, because what we've seen over the last 15, 20 years is not sustainable.
Right. And again, this is a deep conversation because a lot of it goes back to what we always hear. We say, oh, well, we talk about the word unbalanced trade, right? So like we say, well, wouldn't it be great if China bought more of the stuff that they make? Well, I've been to China and it's still a very poor country, and it's not as poor as India, but by far, India is very poor, but it's probably poorer than, let's say, Brazil, for example. I mean, Brazil might be, there might be places in Brazil that are very poor in the north, as you know, but there's a lot more poor people in China who live like the people in Northeast Brazil than there are who live in the Northeast Brazil by a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So, those people are not going to put solar panels on their house. They're not going to live in a town that has the money to put 20 windmills that are made in China. They're not doing that. They're not buying BYD EVs, right? They're not buying the new ones. They're not buying Michael Kors handbags. They're buying the knockoffs, right? So, these are people who, there are hundreds of millions of them. They don't, and even the rich ones, they're not like the United States, right? They're not like the average American whose garage doesn't hold cars. It holds kayaks and toys. You know what I mean? So, that's something that's very hard. It's very hard to convince countries like China to be the consumer, because
right. And then I think a lot of American companies believed that this was a huge market that they were going to be able to tap into. Yeah. But not only did they want to export all of their stuff and sort of take over manufacturing to the United States, they also, in many cases, impeded American companies from selling our products into China, which led to this, what I would describe as a horrific imbalance and unfair situation in trade.
Right. And we could say that China had a make China great again attitude, right? The same way. I don't want to import a whole bunch of Boeings. Wouldn't it be great if we had Boeing planes made here? And then that became, wouldn't it be even greater if we made our own planes? Right. So, and that's what's happening now.
Right. And they've become very good at it. Let's face it. It used to be just like, remember when Japan first started out, that it was basically junk coming from there. And then they built the Honda Accord, one of the best cars ever built. Now China is starting to produce a lot of very high quality products. They can do just about anything. And we've transferred that technology over there, and they've taken the ball and run with it. But it's time to put some balance back into this thing. It's time to bring some of these jobs back to the United States, probably not all of them, and start rebuilding our communities on that solid footing of manufacturing. And when we come back for the final segment, let's talk about some of those changes and what we can expect to come in the next 100 days of the Trump administration. This is Greg Owens, Home Talk USA. This is the Made in America Hour. We will be right back.
Would you like to host your own radio program or podcast? Park City Productions 06604 is a Bridgeport, Connecticut-based radio broadcast solutions company. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Park City Productions 06604. Call us at 203-522-8801.
Welcome back, everybody, to Home Talk USA. This is the Made in America Hour. I'm here with Ken Rapoza from the Coalition for a Prosperous America, discussing all things made in America. Before we get back with Ken, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, Aztec Washer, revolutionary and innovative roofing products since 1968. Their motto is seal it right, seal it tight. You can find them at aztecwasher.com. Ken, welcome back. And as we close out the hour, just want to throw out an open-ended question. I mean, we're all seeing the first couple weeks of the Trump administration. Some of us were maybe a little surprised that the tariffs didn't hit on the first day. I have my own feelings about that. I think it makes a lot of sense. What do you expect in the next couple weeks leading up to maybe April 1st when these reports are coming out? I know you had an op-ed come out recently. Give us your perspective on what's going on right now.
Okay. So I will say that the tariffs haven't kicked in the way you might have expected, but they have been used. Mm-hmm. So this weekend, we might have tariffs on Mexico and Canada. But let's not forget what happened on Sunday. We had a tariff threat of 25% on Colombia if they did not bring back their migrants, the criminal arrested migrants that district attorneys and blue city police officers were letting roam the streets after multiple arrests, if they did not welcome back these future scientists. Okay, so
right.
that tariff threat worked. Right, because
it took about 4 hours, okay, right?
We give up. Right, it works. So we are seeing tariff. Now, the other thing about why aren't we seeing because Trump's going after, he's bringing up 3 tariffs. Tariffs as a negotiation tool, tariffs as a form of revenue, like a lower tariff, 10-20% as a lower tariff worldwide as a form of revenue. So you can extend tax cuts, the Tax Cut and Job Act, which is up for renewal this year or next year. And of course, lower our taxes also, perhaps. And of course, tariffs on foreign countries like China and segments of the economy like steel or solar, for example, which could be made anywhere, not necessarily China. That, I think, you're waiting to see what happens. What you're waiting to get your pieces in place. So you got to get Scott Bessent in Treasury because he's the guy who's coordinating a lot of those things. We don't have a Treasury Secretary yet. Scott Bessent should be confirmed today. Should be. Okay. We don't have a Commerce Secretary yet. Howard Lutnick is not, he hasn't even had his interviews yet, as far as I recall. So that, of course, the typical Capitol Hill, they have not moved any quickly on Trump's nominations, right? So the Imperial Capitol wants to, they like to trip up Trump. So they're taking forever to nominate Trump's guy. So you got to get commerce in place and you got to get Treasury in place before you start doing those other kind of tariffs. But these emergency measure tariffs, so Trump can threaten tariffs on a country, right? That's happening. We're already seeing it. And again, we might see it this weekend with Mexico and Canada, unless Mexico and Canada can prove that maybe they've done something on fentanyl or they've done something better on the immigration problem.
Right. And that was sort of my first take on it. I was kind of set back in my chair a little bit that there wasn't something announced. But then I put on my CEO hat and I'm like, geez, I'm going to jump in, take over a company, for example. And am I really going to start changing a lot of things and implementing some radically different policies without having my team in place to implement them? That would be absolutely nuts.
Correct.
Aside from that, waiting until the cabinet positions are nominated, they know who they are, they can sit down and do a coordinated effort to implement this correctly. There's also the legal aspects of, you can't just go in there and do it sort of willy-nilly on an executive order. You would much rather, you need to have reports, studies done that back up the actions that you're going to take. Otherwise, they can be challenged in court and could drag out for years. And that's not something that I believe the president wants to have happen. So it is going a little slower than many thought, but I think it's been well thought out. And it is something that we should look to by the beginning of the spring time. We should have a lot more clarity on where this is headed.
Yeah, sure.
Where do you think it's headed? What are we? Do you think we're going to get the trifecta of across the board revenue tariffs with some punitive tariffs and some negotiating tactics, or what do you see happening?
Yes, I think you're going to get all of those things. But it's hard to say, Greg. It's hard to say. Are you going to get a revenue tariff? Is it going to be 10%? Is it going to be in place for like a year or 6 months, and then whatever? There's a negotiation where Europe says, okay, look, we'll buy more of this, or we'll buy more beef, whatever it is that they come up with, right? And then the tariff is removed. So those things can also happen, right? You could put a revenue tariff in place. Other countries can say, we don't want it. What can we do to remove it? And then negotiate a deal to remove it. Right.
And
of course, you remember, we're fine with that removal because we want to lower our trade deficit with Europe. So if we can do that, okay, maybe we call that a win. So we will see. Time will tell. But all those three tools will definitely be used in the months ahead. You'll hear about it. Sentence in.
I hear other people hear the word negotiating tactic and think, oh well, it was just a bunch of rhetoric and it's not really going to happen. But remember the Plaza Accords, where we had a similar situation with Japan sort of taking over the world. I remember Time Magazine had Japan Inc. on there, and it was pretty much a done deal. It was over. They were going to take over the world. They sat down at the Plaza Hotel, struck out a deal where they were not going to stop manipulating their currency. And lo and behold, we had balanced trade, or more balanced trade at least, with Japan. They started building factories here and employing Americans. And that's maybe where the negotiating part of it is headed. But Ken, we've done it again. I say this at the end of every broadcast. We're running out of time here and a lot more to talk about. So looking forward to having you and other members from CPA back on the program. Maybe we can have a couple of you together in more of a panel type discussion and continue this conversation as we move forward into the Trump administration 2.0, and we see exactly where that leads us. So Ken, thank you for joining us. I'm Greg Owens on Home Talk USA. This has been the Made in America Hour. Look forward to chatting with everyone again next week.